Hey everybody, let's finish up our sinusoidal functions transformations section. Let's talk about the last part that we haven't talked about, which is a phase shift. And remember that a phase shift is inside the parentheses, and we call this plus C. Remember, because it's horizontal, this is in Funky Town, right? Which means everything is opposite of what it seems. So remember, for the horizontal or phase shift, if it's positive, it's going to the left because it's the opposite. And if it's negative, we're going to the right. So if we look at that here, if we also see this B, remember that's the period. Remember, notice that it's factored away from that phase shift. So this is really important. This is your amplitude, and here's your new midline, just like we've seen before. And it also goes for cosine as well. This would also be the phase shift, which affects it horizontally. So let's see what this looks like when we try to apply it to an actual graph. So this is very similar to what we've been doing, but we're adding a phase shift here. So let's look at this. This is our amplitude. Here's our midline. Our midline plus the amplitude is going to be our maximum, and then the midline minus our amplitude is our minimum. There's no B value different. That's a 1, so the period stays at 2 pi, and the frequency is 1 over 2 pi. Now we're looking at this. So we know our phase shift, it's Funky Town. So if it's plus, we're actually going to the left by pi over 4. So if we look at that numerically, we're going to see that that says left pi over 4, and we see that there's some extra room there as well. So let's give ourselves some boundaries here. My midline is going to go here at 2. My maximum is going to be 3 above that. My minimum will be 3 below. So I know my whole graph is going to stay within those two ranges, the maximum and the minimum. We also know we're talking about a cosine wave. So remember, one cosine function typically looks like this, but because we're shifting everything to the left, keep in mind, instead of starting at the peak at 0, we're going to shift everything to the left. So I'm going to kind of make myself a new starting grid, and I know that my starting is going to happen at this negative pi over 4 right here. So I'm kind of drawing that in as like a new starting axis, and then from there we can start to graph. So we're starting at cosine is our peak. So on my new starting axis, this is my maximum. I know I'm going to go 2 pi away. So 2 pi from negative pi over 4 is just pi over 4 to the left of 2 pi, so that's where it's going to end up. Halfway through, which will be between pi over 2 and pi, it's going to be a minimum, and we know halfway between those points, they're going to be on the midline. So this is the same graph as cosine, but we've shifted everything to the left this way. So instead of starting here, we shifted it to the left. Instead of our bottom point being here at pi, we shifted it to the left. And then let's follow this through. I know if I go down 3 and over 2, we get to the next critical points. Okay? All right, let's look at this next one. So keep in mind still, this negative means there's going to be a vertical flip. So this is going to be upside down. Here's your amplitude. Here's your midline. Remember that your midline plus the amplitude is your maximum value. The midline minus the amplitude is your minimum value. The period here does something a little different, but what are we looking at? Remember that inside the parentheses, we see that this is factored. Someone unfactored this or distributed it through, so we need to refactor it. So looking at this 2, I'm going to rewrite this as 2 parentheses x. And then undoing this, we're going to say, okay, well, what times 2 will get back to pi, which this is going to be a minus pi over 2. If I redistribute that, I'm going to get back to 2x and regular pi, so we're good to go. So my new equation is negative 2 sine 2 parentheses x minus 2, all minus 1. So this is our b value, which so we know the period is 2 pi over b, which is just pi, so our frequency is 1 over pi. And the phase shift here, we know that's a minus, so that's actually going to go to the right by pi over 2, which is that C value. All right, let's make some guides for ourselves. So I know my midline's at -1. The amplitude is going all the way up to 2. Or sorry, it's an amplitude of 2, so let's erase that. So 2 above the midline and 2 below the midline. On our max, our phase shift is everything's going pi over 2. So instead of starting here, we're shifting over here. So this is my new starting axis. And we know the period is pi now. So from pi over 2, pi away, that means I'm going to end here at 3 pi over 2. So let's go ahead and draw one cycle of sine. Remember, sine typically looks like this. Keep in mind, we are vertical flipping as well. So sine normally starts on the midline at the starting point. So that would be right here because our new starting axis shifted to the right by pi over 2, and here's my new midline. Now we're going to, instead of going up, we're going to be going down to a minimum because of that negative in front of our equation, which tells me we're going to flip halfway through. I'm sorry, back up. Back up. The period's pi. Whoopsie, the period's pi. So I know instead of down 1 pi away, we know it's going to hit the same point. Right in the middle, we're going to have our third 0, which means in between those two, we're going to have our minimum, and here is our maximum. We're going to graph those two. And now let's sketch the rest. And we're going to keep that pattern for the rest of it. Did I mess that up? I think I did. Yep, I did. There we go. And then up one over, there we go. Make sure you use pencil, okay, friends? Do as I say, not as I do. All right, that's it for that graph. Let's create a sine function that has an amplitude of 3. That's going to be our A value. If the period is pi, how do we find B? Well, I know B equals 2 pi divided by the period. That's 2 pi over pi, which is 2. So there's our B value. Our phase shift is to the left, a pi over 8, which remember, left means we're going to add that. And our vertical shift down is -4. So if I sketch this, or if I graph this or write it, I know I'm dealing with the sine function. Here's our amplitude of 3. Our first set of parentheses is going to be the B value. Here's our 2. And then we're going to have x with our phase shift. So remember, if it's a left, we're actually going to go plus pi over 8. And then finally down, vertical shift down 4. And then the last one, write the equation of the following sine curve. So remember, if it's sine starts at the midline. So where do we see that something's happened here? There's a phase shift here. So first, let's identify our midline. Here's our midline right here. Because if this is our maximum and this is our minimum line down here, we know it's going to be exactly in the middle of those two. We know that A is our amplitude. A has got to be 2 because it goes 2 above and 2 below. We know our midline is y equals -1. But here we see this, this horizontal shift. We see that everything, instead of starting at 0, 0, it started at pi over 4. So again, instead of starting here, it started at pi over 4 to the right. So there's a phase shift going to the right of pi over 4. So we'll deal with that as our C value. And then lastly, this is our midline. So let's go ahead and graph or sketch this out, write our equation. So we know A is 2 sine. The period, we haven't talked about that one yet. It's really important. So here I can kind of see that this is going to finish just past 2 pi. So see how everything shifted to the right, 2 pi. So our period is still 2 pi. So that tells me B is still 1 because it hasn't changed. So we're going to say B, which is just 1x. And then here comes our phase shift. If we're going to the right, we're actually subtracting because of Funky Town. Everything's the opposite of what we see. And then finally, our midline is down 1, so we put that -1. All right, that's it. And go ahead and finish up all those practice problems from 3.6A for your homework. And we'll do practice on Monday for 3.6B.